Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our Friday meeting. My name is Michael Cherisi, Chair and President of Hack at UCF. I'm going to go ahead and get started with the meeting. So first thing on the agenda, please make sure you sign in if you'd like your attendance to be tracked. That helps keep track of some record keeping on our end, and also make sure that you're in attendance so we can keep track of who's here, who's not, and kind of get a baseline for attendance so we know how we're doing. So once you do that out of the way, there's a few links you can visit after the meeting to stay informed and follow up with us. The main two here are going to be our Discord server. If you're not in there already, please make sure to join that. That is where most of our members are present, and where we communicate, we post announcements, and you can collaborate on things like the workshop when that time comes. We also have a shop, kind of new here if you've been around a while. So that's where you can buy some of our merchandise, which we will be talking a little bit about today as well. There's some news about that. And on the outer two, we have a mailing list and our Twitter. Mailing list you just subscribe to. We send out an email once a week about any workshops that we have coming up, any other announcements like important CTFs, or any events that we're hosting ourselves. If that sounds fun, please make sure to sign up there. So today's topics, we're going to go over some announcements today, just 3 of them. And then Jeffrey is going to bring us current events. And then we're going to move on to tool time with Alex on some cool extensions for VS Code. And our main talk today will actually be a guest speaker from X-Force Red. That's an IBM department, I believe. And he's going to talk about Active Directory hacking, which sounds very cool. And then after that, we're going to close. So with that, let's move on to the announcements. First on the board, we do have an operations team. If you come to these clubs and you find out that you really like what we do here and you'd like to help us out after the fact, or you would like to help us plan meetings or plan workshops, or if you feel like you would like to lead a workshop one day, please stop in our operations meetings. This happens every Tuesday at 8 p.m. and it's going to be on Zoom for your wellness because we can't meet in person anymore. So it is open to anyone. That means any of you here as well. So the announcement for that gets posted in our Discord server the Tuesday. That's at 8 p.m. And it also gets sent out on the calendar, on Discord, and our web courses if you're on that. And that's the only way to get that ops role. We do have an ops channel where we do discuss topics and logistics about the meetings and workshops. So if that sounds fun, please stop by ops. And the announcements today are going to be about our merchandise, about our hoodies and t-shirts. We have some stuffs about CTF that's happening this weekend. And then we're going to announce our workshop that we're doing this Saturday. We're actually getting back into that cycle. So this is the first workshop of the semester. So don't worry, you have not missed anything before. So we've been pushing this throughout the semester. This is still going on. We did have a design competition last semester, and the 3 t-shirts you see here were the ones submitted. If you are a dues paying member or were a dues paying member last semester, you do receive $10 off these shirts. Please check your email for that coupon code. If you are not a dues paying member, you're still welcome to buy these shirts, however, not at a discounted price. And these 3 shirts you can visit at shop.hackucf.org. And these are open all semester and indefinitely, actually. Now the hoodies. This is your last day to get the hoodie. If you're interested in doing so, please make sure you purchase them at the end of day. The form closes at midnight tonight. So again, this is the last day. Please visit hoodies.hackucf.org to reserve yours and get that ordered. After the form closes today, over the next few days, we'll process the payments and get it ordered. And our provider says it will take about 2 weeks to get shipped out to you. So if this looks interesting to you, please make sure you get it today. So there are 2 CTFs happening this weekend, 2 that we're outlining. The Trollcat CTF and the Dice CTF. These are both Jeopardy style CTFs, which means you're presented with a list of categories to complete challenges in, such as forensics, pwn, or reverse engineering. And those all require different skill sets to complete the challenge. If you may feel intimidated about trying these CTFs, these are beginner friendly, don't worry. However, if that still is not enough, you can always practice 24/7 at our own CTF website. That is ctf.hackucf.org. That is hosted on our infrastructure and listed by us. So we have everything from the beginner to more advanced. And again, it's open all the time. So if you ever want to do CTF challenges, you're more than welcome to hop on there. And for any more information on CTFs, please visit ctftime.org. That's where we got these 2 of these. And for any future CTFs that are not listed here, and you want to go on your own time and see just all the CTFs that are happening from all skill levels, please visit there for the vast amount of information, much more than what we provide here. So another CTF actually happening is the National Cyber League, or the NCL. This happened last semester, and it received a lot of positive turnout. So what's happening now is they're doing it twice a year. So this is going to be the second time in the spring semester. The registration is now open, and there's a link as well, and I believe it will be posted in the chat in just a minute. And there it is. So the registration costs $35, and this is a very nice competition. It is a team game, so it's worth every penny for that $35. That can go a long way, and you can definitely put that on your resume and get returns after the fact. There's an individual game and a team game on the dates listed here. So that's all thing. The CTFs are this weekend. The NCL is upcoming soon. And what's happening tomorrow, we do have a workshop. That's the first of the semester. It's going to be about cracking passwords and how you do those. I've seen the slides, it looks pretty good. And if you're interested in cracking passwords, or kind of what makes a password and all that fun stuff, that will go in detail tomorrow at noon. Anyone that you can use web browser with virtualization, you can come. Getting a Kali set up is highly recommended. Some of the tools going over is going to be like Hashcat, John the Ripper, CrackStation, all that stuff as well. The link for this will be in our Discord posted tomorrow, and it is on our public calendar already. This will be put on by Daniel, one of our operations members. And again, that is tomorrow at noon. So now I'm going to pass it off to Jeffrey for current events. So take it away.
Thank you. So next slide. So in SolarWinds news, as Orion has been recently facing more scrutiny, more researchers are taking a look, and researcher Martin Rachmanov found a bug in it. There's an arbitrary code execution bug that originates through an insecure use of Microsoft Message Queue, or MSNQ. In short, it allowed you to process, send, and SolarWinds would process messages from not SolarWinds. So the fix was to add a signature validation step before processing these messages, even though the MSNQ queue remains unauthenticated. If you use SolarWinds Orion, if you aren't clicking F5 like every 5 seconds for an update, you should update as soon as possible. And this Tuesday, a proof of concept will be released, so that's your timeline. Next slide. In malware news, a ransomware previously affecting IT firm NetGain back in December is now affecting some of their customers. One of these customers, the Family Health Division of Ramsey County, Minnesota. There's a lot of data at risk: names, addresses, medical and insurance info, and even social security numbers. Speculative reports say that the ransomware originated from the Revo ransomware gang and that the ransom was paid. However, this was only based off of like one source, so citation needed. Next slide. And finally, if you recall last month, there was the APT38, a North Korean-based hacking team that goes by Lazarus Group, targeted security researchers in order to try to steal exploits with a social engineering attack. Well, they're back, and they unsuccessfully targeted South Korean firm Enki. They tried keyword try to exploit a 0-day on IE11 to run code from a command and control, or C2 server, and uses the mHTML container format to force this researchers to open this up in Internet Explorer. Thankfully, they did not, and Enki caught it pretty quickly and published a really detailed write-up on what happened. However, it's in Korean. This 0-day, quote unquote, may have been known by actually other researchers, and Microsoft is already looking for a crack or a patch. So yeah, really good 0-day work, North Korea. So yeah, that's it for current events. So I'm gonna hand this over to Alex, and he's gonna show us a cool VS Code extension. So take it away.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Hey everyone, my name's Alex. I hope you're all as stoked as I am to get into some Active Directory shenanigans in a bit. But before we get there, we're going to talk about something much more basic, your text editor. Next slide, please. So if you've ever been SSH'd into a machine and found yourself frustrated by the unintuitive, plain-looking command line text editors included in headless Linux boxes, this is for you. Like if you've ever had to lean on the down key in Nano to get to the part of the file you want to edit, or if you've made the horrible mistake of opening a death trap and gotten stuck inside of Vim, or even if you just want to take your rich syntax highlighting with you wherever you go, listen up, because we are going to solve those problems today. Next slide, please. So a few quick facts about the remote SSH extension for VS Code. It has been installed 2.7 million times, so it's pretty safe to assume that any usability bugs have been squashed by the time you get to it. It is usable on practically any remote machine. You can see a list of compatible host operating systems there on the right. It's simple to install. It takes a quick search and a few clicks and you're golden. By nature, it is seamless to use since it, of course, integrates directly with VS Code. There are a lot of third-party VS Code extensions out there, but this one is developed by Microsoft, who, of course, also maintains VS Code itself. So there should be no worries about any sort of compatibility issues. Next slide, and please hum the Jeopardy theme to yourself while I start screen share. Okay, so here we are. We've got VS Code open. So the first thing you're going to want to do if you don't have VS Code is get VS Code. And once you've done that, the second thing you're going to want to do is download the Remote Development Extension Pack for VS Code. And it includes these three things right here: the Remote SSH extension, the Remote Containers extension, and the Remote WSL extension. You can also use the extension interface in VS Code to install it. So I'll just search remote SSH, and it's the first thing that comes up. Boom, installed. Okay, so now how do we use it? With it installed, I just press F1. I type in remote SSH, and it gives me a bunch of options for commands. Oh, it's not letting me see chat, so hope that wasn't important. Anyway, I'll click on connect to host, and it uses the OpenSSH compatible SSH client you have installed on your machine, meaning if you already have an SSH config set up, it will immediately be usable by the extension. So if I go into configure SSH hosts, it shows me a list of SSH configs. So let's open this one up. Now I can edit this manually, or I could use the extension to add a new SSH host. And it will have you type in the command that you would use to SSH into that machine. And it will give you the list of configuration files to update. Now, as soon as I do that, that host appears right here in this config file. However, you have to tell it where your private key is manually. And now I can connect to any of these preloaded hosts that are in my SSH config. There's a way to make your SSH client save your passphrase for your private key, but I just haven't configured that at this time. Okay, so we have this bash shell on a remote machine now. I can even use the command line text editors like Nano in this terminal right here. That's directly inside VS Code. Now there's a bit of syntax highlighting, but I can't do fun things like click and type at the location I clicked. In Nano, I just have to use my arrow keys for everything, so that's not really ideal. But what I can do is open the same thing right here in VS Code by just typing code and the file name. Now, if I don't want to use the terminal to open files, what I can do is I can open a folder. And what this does for me is now I can see an interface on the left for all of the files that are in that folder. And I can edit them straight from there. Now, maybe some of you have been sitting there watching this with your eyes glazed over thinking, but Alex, VS Code isn't my favorite text editor. Like maybe your favorite editor is, for example, Atom. Not to worry, my friend, because this tool time has a surprise twofer, MOBA Xterm. Now I've got this host already set up on MOBA Xterm. And it shows me all of my directories in a graphical user interface. And what I can do is open that same file but in any editor I want. So I've added this comment that says, hello, let's go ahead and Control S to save it. And because I opened it through MOBA Xterm, it asks if I want to replace the file on the host with the one I just edited. And you can set it to autosave. So every time you press Control S, it will upload what you just edited to the host machine. And of course, if I go back to VS Code, we can see that edit that happened in Atom is shown right here. And that's about it for the basics of how to use these tools. I hope you all found these tips helpful. Google will be your friend if you want to get into advanced config shenanigans. Oh, now I can see the chat. Interesting. If you do code dot, will you get the whole directory as a project? And I haven't tried it, but Ryan says yes, so I'm going to say yes. Anyway, I'm going to stop screen share now, and on the next slide will be a couple of resources. If this tool time stops even one person from using Nano for everything, I will consider that a success. And if you'd like to chat about what you just saw, hit me up on Discord. I am Advanced Persistent Leaf in the Hack UCF server. And with that, I thank you all for your eyes and ears, and I hand the talking stick back to our president.
All right, Alex, thank you for the tool time. VS Code is a very powerful text editor. I use it all the time. It's actually my favorite. And the remote SSH extension makes it even that much better, because then it allows you to use VS Code on other machines, but doing so locally. So if you're someone who does a lot of text editing, especially on remote servers, multiple at once, I highly recommend giving this extension a try. So with that all done, now I'm prepared to hand it off to our guest speaker today. So we're going to talk about Active Directory hacking by Scott Brink. So Scott, take it from here.
Hey everyone. I dropped this in the chat too. There's actually a Vim plugin for the same kind of thing with that VS Code extension. So you can bring your Vim RC wherever you go as well. I use it a lot. Let's see. I got some slides to share. And I don't know which screen is which. Is this the right screen? Hey, there we go. Perfect. So let me pull up the chat as well. I'll have chat up at the same time so I can answer questions as this is going on. And yeah, let's just get started. There's also a, there is going to be a hands-on portion, meaning I'm going to be doing a live demo. And luckily I've tested it for about maybe 5 or 10 minutes. So hopefully it'll work. So yeah, today's going to be practical attacks against Active Directory. So who am I? I'm an RIT alum back in 2019. I was a previous CPTC competitor, and now I actually do grading for National CPTC. As was stated earlier, I'm a penetration tester for X-Force Red, and I focus in breaking. I do internal network testing, which is a majority of like AD right now. So we're going to be focusing on that today. I'm also one of the leads of our internship we have every summer. Our job posting is down for this year. However, I'm going to have some contact info at the end. So if you're interested, that will be for next year. We're going to be hiring a bunch of interns again. So disclaimer, don't hack things that you don't own. That's bad. Don't be bad. This is not every single Active Directory attack there is. This is just a couple of them. It's a good starting point. We're only focused on a single domain here. We're not talking about multi-domain. We're not talking about forests or anything like that. And also, these slides are going to be super word heavy. I'll be providing the link after my presentation in the chat. So it will be all of the slides so you can actually take these and use these if you ever find yourself doing AD testing. So first, let's start off for people who don't know what Active Directory is. It's most internal networks run Windows. Like every company runs Windows, and it's like 88% of the operating market share. And this stat is definitely an exact stat because I remember I clicked on a website 2 years ago and it said it. So I'm going to go with it. And for managing a lot of Windows hosts, Active Directory is the only thing that you can use at this point. It's the only way to manage major large scale 20, 30,000 host networks. So a couple of key terms we need to know before we move on. A domain, that's a unit of grouping. So that's whether it's ritsec.local, corp.local, contoso.com. It's just one way to group things together. The domain controller, I like to think of it as like the brains of the domain.
Yeah.
The domain controller, it's the main center of authentication. It handles every authentication request in a domain. A user is a account within, well, a user is actually just an account. A group is a group. This is a good way to delegate permissions rather than saying these 7,000 users, one by one, can all log into this computer. You can say, hey, all of these users are part of our IT group. Our IT group can all log into this computer. A domain user is a user that has to authenticate through the domain controller before logging in. A local user authenticates to the computer itself rather than authenticating to the domain controller. So before we start talking about it, you should try to build your own Active Directory lab. The best way to learn Active Directory is you need to set it up on your own. I have a lot of things. I'm not going to get too deep into what these links are, but I'll provide this after, and hopefully it'll be helpful. So before we get into it, once again, we're going to talk about authentication. So it's a good thing you guys are having a password cracking boot camp, because a lot of this authentication, I spend most of my days cracking these types of hashes. So first, we're going to talk about Landman. Landman is a super old thing. It was on Windows XP in 2003 and prior. It's turned off by default after Vista and Server 2008. You might see it in domains. You might see this in domains that you would test, and you might ask, but this is like a Windows Server 2016. Why would it have Landman hatches enabled? Usually that's because people have upgraded from a Server 2003 all the way up to a Server 2012, Server 2016 over the years that a company has existed. And because of that, the Landman hashes still persist through those upgrades. An NTL, well, technically an NT hash, it can be used for a pass to hash, which we'll talk about later on. But pretty much if you have an NTLM hash, it's just as good as a password to Windows. Then we have Ntlm V1. Ntlm V1 is how over the network NTLM hashes used to be transferred. This Ntlm V1 actually has a cryptographic flaw, which can allow you to reverse it down to a certain number of bytes of the NTLM. I want to say it's like either 24 or 28. And from there, you can brute force the last, whatever it is, 4 to 8 bytes of the hash in order to get the NTLM hash out of a Ntlm V1. So it's cryptographically reversible. So Ntlm V2 was released. It's the standard today. You can crack it. It's not super easy to crack, but you can crack it. Domain cache credentials version 2, these are very hard to crack. In short, it's kind of bcrypt under the hood, but we are just going to kind of blow past that. You can look into DCC2 if you want. And then Kerberos, we're also going to blow past that for right now. So here's the scenario we're going to go through for this presentation. You're placed in a network segment in an enterprise environment. You have nothing but a Linux laptop and an internet connection. Your goal is to get DA. And DA is domain admin. So initially, you land on a network and you have no idea what's going on. You want to find domain controllers. And there are a couple ways to do that. First, you don't know what domain you're in. If you're a Linux laptop that's connected to the network, there are a couple ways you can go about this first to figure out what domain you're on. Sure, you could go and scan the entire network, but you don't need to do that. What you can do is you can send out a DHCP discover request. And so that's saying, hey, domain or DHCP server, usually your domain controller, I need an address. Can you give me one? And the DHCP server gives you an address, which also has DNS configuration in it. So it will return, oh, hey, look, here is now the domain that you're on. Once you know that domain, you can actually find the domain controllers because Active Directory relies on DNS SRV records for service discovery. So you can query these with dig, or I like to use this nmap script here. I actually made a typo in that, so technically it's wrong. It should be tac on script args, not just one in the front, but whatever. That will enumerate a bunch of different SRV records for you. Another thing you should do right off the bat, if you're going towards hacking Active Directory, you should scan for SMB. And sure, you could use nmap scan for port 445 or mass scan to scan for port 445, and then from there use CME. That definitely would be faster. But if you only have 1/24, it's not going to take that long. So you can just scan the /24. So before we get to no domain user attacks, actually, no, we'll go through this and then we'll head over to the live demo. We are going to talk about three things. Once again, more alphabet soup, LLMNR and MBTNS poisoning, NTLM relay, and MITM6. So LLMNR and MBTNS, that's a mouthful. What that stands for is Link Local Multicast Name Resolution and NetBIOS Name Services. They're Windows discovery protocols. LLMNR is MDNS based, and MBTNS is NetBIOS names. And if a user requests, let's say I'm trying to get to a file share called share1, and I typo it and type in share2. I would send out a SMB request saying, hey, I'm trying to connect to share2. If I turn on a tool called Responder, I now have a rogue SMB server that will respond to these requests and say, hey, I'm share2, authenticate to me, which will mean that user will authenticate with its Ntlm V1 hash towards our box, letting us gather that hash to try to crack it offline. And what we can do instead of cracking that hash, if we have, or if the server that we want to authenticate to does not have SMB signing, we can actually relay that authentication attempt. So someone says, hey, I'm trying to connect to share2. And then it's like, yeah, I'm share2 here. Let me take your authentication request and I'll send it to the real share1 that you were initially trying to get to. And then you can log in that way. MITM6 is a little complicated, so I have to do a little setup before. So if an Active Directory network isn't using IPv6, this is probably going to be enabled. So what this does is you spin up a rogue DHCP v6 server. And what this does is it listens to requests from Windows machines on the network for any server or any boxes that need an IPv6 address, which is turned on by default every time for every OS after Windows Vista. So if there is no IPv6 DHCP server in the environment, we can now assign addresses. So now that we can assign addresses, we can control DNS because Windows says, oh yeah, you have an IPv6 DNS server. That should be the primary one, not your IPv4. So we now totally control DNS. So WPAD, and this is the second part. So the first part was we need to spoof DNS. The second part is we're utilizing an issue with Windows proxy auto detection. So this allows us to serve a proxy file for like internal use. So if a company says, hey, we need to proxy your traffic to monitor it, to detect you're not doing anything malicious. That makes sense. Most companies have an internal proxy. But if there's no valid DNS entry for WPAD, this can be spoofed. And we can say, hey, you're looking for a WPAD file. You guys don't, or this company doesn't have a WPAD file that it's giving out. Here, take my WPAD file. So everyone will then authenticate through you. And initially, that request was sent out using LLMNR, which is a protocol that we were able to spoof. In 2016, the default behavior of this changed to only DNS. So we weren't able to spoof LLMNR MBTNS. We couldn't spoof the DNS here. So we're like, okay, WPAD is dead. Unless you now control DNS because of IPv6. So with those two things together, you just get shells. You get shells and shells and shells. I turned this on a network, and at one point, I think I got local admin on 50 machines in about 5 minutes. It was insane. So now we are going to stop sharing, and we are going to share my terminal screen, which I think is this one. Cool. So we're going to talk about a couple of things here. So first, I need to bring the chat back up 1 second. So let me know if this is too small or I need to make it bigger. So first, we're going to do that broadcast DHCP discover request. And if you look, we get a IP address back. But the thing we care about is we now know the domain name, zentax.local. So we take that and we put that into our DNS SRV enumeration script. So SRV enum, .domain, and we're going to do zentax.local. And what that will return us is nothing for some reason. And this is why, and the reason why is turns out you need to actually give it the script args flag. And what you can see here is there's only going to be one domain controller in this entire environment. That's DA_SX_01. And that's because if you look, it has all of these ports open. And I'm not going to get into what these are. You can look those up on your own. There's a link at the end of the presentation. So what we want to do now is okay, we know what domain we're in, and we know the domain controller. So we also want to find any clients that are on the network. Let's say you were given a scope for this that was 10.10.10.0/24. So we're going to start this scan on all of, and here I'll lower this so it makes a little more sense. We're starting to scan on all of the 10. network. I'm going to Control-C out of this because I know that these are all the clients that show up. Something that is important to note is if you ever see like DACL01 or DACL02, host names matter in environments. So you can sometimes infer things from these. For example, CL meaning client. So these would be client 1 and client 2. So unfortunately, we won't be running responder during this just for time's sake, but let's say we ran responder and we got a domain user. We got the Ntlm hash for bsmith, and we got the Ntlm V2 hash for bsmith, and we cracked it, and his password was, or at least according to the cracked hash, his password was Zentax1. So to verify these creds, we can authenticate towards the domain controller, which is this, with the username of bsmith and the password of Zentax1, which we would have got from our responder logs. And we try to authenticate, and it shows plus, meaning that we can log in. So now we have a domain account. So I'm going to go back to sharing the slides, and hopefully this will work. Share. Do the slides work for everyone? Cool. Okay. So we have a domain user now. There are a couple things we can do here. So first one would be Bloodhound. This is a tool written by the folks over at SpecterOps. They do some amazing work related to Active Directory. If you're at all interested, you should really look in. All interested in Active Directory, you should definitely look into SpecterOps. So Bloodhound, in a 2-second overview, is an Active Directory modeling tools. It enumerates the ACLs and the LDAP catalog, and then makes a graph of this user is a part of this group, that group is part of this group, which is a part of this group, which is an admin to this computer, which can log in over there. And it can help you create attack paths for within Active Directory due to mismanaged privileges over time. I was able at one point to find through Bloodhound a domain computers group where every single computer could DC sync in the environment, which right now, if you don't know what DC sync means, you're like, oh, whatever. But at the end, you'll figure out that that meant that every single domain computer was pretty much a domain admin. So now we're going to talk about password sprays. With a full user list, well, because we have a domain user, we can enumerate the LDAP catalog. From there, we can get computers and like usernames, every single one in Active Directory. So you can try password sprays. A lot of the time, you'll see really weak passwords by people because that's just how it is. And Zach, that's a good question. I'll explain that when we get into the next live demo. For those who don't see the chat, it's asking what CME. Actually, you don't know. We're right here. So crack map exec is what CME is. And crack map exec will let you log in with whatever protocols you want. There's a couple lists of them, and I'll get into that a little more when we move into the live demo to talk about it a little more than initially. But right now in this scenario, it's used to log in and get a couple of other useful things. That's something I should have went over. But we can use CME here to log in, and you can also password spray. So if you have like a list of users, you can take passwords. Let's say it's, what is it? It's January of 2021. So winter 2020 if they changed their password prior to the new year, or winter 2021 if they changed it in the past month or so. You'd be amazed at how many people's passwords are winter 2020. I've seen companies that have over 100 or 200 of their users have a password of winter 2020. It's important to note that there is a lockout policy in almost every domain. So you don't just want to take RockU and point it at someone. You want to be a little more precise in your password sprays. If you have a valid user, you can dump the password policy of a domain, and we'll do that when we get back into our live demo. If you're an admin, there's a lot of stuff you can do. So you can dump passwords is the main big thing, and you can dump local hashes with the tac-tac-sam command, or you can dump LSA secrets, which have some cached credentials across the domain. You can technically also dump lsas.exe, but we're not really going to talk about that right now. You can use tools like lsasy, and you can use, this would be when you're using a tool like Mimikatz. Mimikatz will take LSA secrets as well as everything stored in lsas. But running stuff like that will be pretty loud in the environment. Curb roasting is another really good one that you can do. So we're not really going to cover Kerberos in depth here. I made a link to a write-up written by a guy named Pixis, and he makes some amazing blogs. I encourage anyone to go to en.hackanddoo.com and pretty much read every single thing on there. He has a write-up on NTLM Relay, which is it's an estimated reading time of 47 minutes, and it's one of the best reads I've ever done on any topic. But in essence, during one of the steps of a response, you're able to take the ticket and brute force the ticket with hashcad mode 13,100 in order to return the plain text password of the user. This is if a user has a service principal name set, meaning they're a service account within Active Directory. And usually the reason you would want to do this is service accounts have a lot higher privileges than standard users, meaning they probably have admin to more machines and stuff like that. You can do it with get user SPNs. That's a tool in the Packet suite of tools. But today we'll just be using CME because there was an update since the last time I added to these slides. And the print spooler attack is the best attack that you've never heard of. No one really talks about this, but what you can do is you can query a domain controller and you can actually have it respond with the Ntlm V1 hash of its machine account. Now, this isn't usually that much of a problem because the machine account is a like 160-ish character randomized password that you're never going to be able to crack with Ntlm V2. However, the printer bug, which that portion of the attack is called, can be used in two different ways. The first way is if netlogon is, or not netlogon, if the zero logon vulnerability exists within the environment, you can actually use the printer bug to relay an authentication attempt to another domain controller in order to gain DA privileges. But you can also say, if it's responding to you with its net Ntlm V2, you can say, hey, I only support Ntlm V1. Can you please respond to me with Ntlm V1? And if Ntlm V1 is supported by the domain controller, it will say, sure, here you go. Here's the Ntlm V1 of my machine account password, which, like I mentioned on the hashing slide, means we can downgrade it to Ntlm. And then you can pass that hash and you can DC sync, which will pull every single hash of every user in the environment. So that's another thing that we haven't gotten to is DC syncing. Some accounts have access to these DC sync privileges, and pretty much a DC sync is how multiple domain controllers communicate to each other in order to keep their password files, their ntds.dit files up to date. So we say, hey, I'm a domain controller, authenticate to me, or replicate the NTDS to me. And once again, the domain controllers are like, yeah, sure. I mean, you have the privileges for it. Why not? So they just do that. A couple other things is once you've DC synced, you have domain admin. You never want to stop here if you're doing a real life pen test, because DA just gets you access to everything. But there's a lot of other things you can do. You can go through shares. If you only have access to the Windows environment and not the Linux environment, you might be able to find private keys sitting around on desktops and then use those to pivot further into the Linux environment. You can pillage, what are they called? SQL servers, file shares. There's tons of useful information that you can get. So getting DA is just the first step in a pen test. And then I have a bunch of tools and everything. We are now going to move back into the hands-on portion. And now we are going to see, can everyone see this? Just making sure that I've figured out Zoom. Cool. So we now have this bsmith user. And we know that there are 3 other hosts in the environment, this .10, .45, and .60. So I've actually made a file already with all 3 of these IP addresses. And we're going to use this tool, CME, or crack map exec. And we are going to authenticate with SMB. So there are a couple other ways we can authenticate with LDAP, MS SQL, SSH, WinRM. But we're mainly going to be using SMB, except for one time when we use the LDAP module. So what we can do is CME SMB 10.10. Or actually, we can input a text file there. So that's going to attempt to log into every host with our bsmith user. So if we go through all of these hosts, we see that one has a pwned label on it. That means we are a local admin there. So because we are a local admin on that host, I'll move it down here. We can actually dump 2 things from it. So first, we're going to dump local hashes. And this is a standard format of a local account. It is the username, the relative identifier, the landman hash, and then the NT hash. An important thing to note about these hashes, if you look at the landman hash, it starts with AAD3B435 yada yada, and then it duplicates over here. That's an issue with the hashing algorithm. So this stands for a null landman hash. On the right side, we have a null NT hash, 31D6CFE yada yada. All of these accounts that have null passwords are disabled, and we can attempt to authenticate with a local account as well. So let's try authenticating with this local account. And we can try logging in, and you have to also specify local auth as well. And if you look, it can log in, but it's not an admin. The rest of these accounts are disabled, so there's no local admin accounts here that we can utilize. So we'll just stick to the bsmith user. But now we're going to dump LSA secrets. So I accidentally used all the hosts, but whatever. So we have here, we have some Kerberos information. We have the DP API key, or the DP API machine key, which doesn't actually matter to us. And then we have this, once again, doesn't matter to us. And then we have up here, we have these hashes that have DCC2 in them. So these hashes that have DCC2 are those domain cache credentials version 2. These passwords will be nearly impossible to crack, just because they are much slower to do the computational conversion into a DCC2 hash. So it'll take forever to crack them. So usually you just kind of ignore DCC2. But there hasn't been anything in here that's been helpful to us. We didn't get any cache credentials. We didn't get anything useful. So because we have a domain account, we can do 2 things. First, actually, we'll do this one first. We can do Kerberosing, which was what I was talking about before. So this is when we're going to use that LDAP module. And we're going to do CME LDAP, and that IP is the domain controller. And we're going to use our user, bsmith, and the password of Zentex1, and the Kerberos module, and we'll output it to output.txt. And if you look, I typoed the password. And okay, so this is an error that you'll see sometimes, is my clock skew is too great. Luckily, I wrote something to fix that. So hopefully this will work now. And it still doesn't. Whatever. There's a clock skew issue with this. I'll try one more thing. And it doesn't look like it'll fix it. Okay, so it doesn't actually matter. If we Kerberosted correctly, of course, something will break in my live demo. That's fine. if that had actually successfully curb roasted, we would be able to get, we would see information for this user, service SQL admin, and we would attempt to crack this. By the way, what I have here is the crackmapped execs database. I did some testing before, which is why I have a bunch of extra stuff in here, but we get access to the service SQL admin user. And that would be from curb roasting. Right now, I'm doing a live demo, so naturally it's breaking. So we are now going to do a similar thing to when we got bsmith. We don't know what this user is. We don't know anything about them. So we theoretically could use Bloodhound and then look at their privileges, but it's a small environment. So we'll just spray across the environment. So we run this and we'll authenticate to all these. And it looks like we have admin on another host now, the 10.10.10.60. So let's investigate that a little further with the username of service SQL. And you know what, actually here, I'll show you something from the CME database. So whenever you find a valid credential with crackmap exec, it stores it in its credential database. So this account, service SQL admin, has a credential ID of 2. So rather than typing out the username, the password, we can just specify the credential ID. So it will attempt to log in with that credential ID, and it says we're logged in. So once again, we'll dump SAM. So these are the local hashes. Nothing interesting here. Everything's disabled, and I'll just let you know this account is not a local admin. So nothing interesting at all. Then we'll dump LSA. And we're going to dump a bunch of things. And once again, a bunch of DCC2. We're going to kind of ignore that. A bunch of Kerberos stuff. Once again, ignore that. The machine account. It is helpful in some very specific scenarios, but not in this one. DP API, machine key, and then this. We don't actually need any of these. But here's the interesting one. It dumped plain text credentials for a user called Brink. And the reason these credentials are dumping as plain text from this machine is I set up a service on DACL02 to start using these credentials. So in the services UI, I typed in like, oh, Brink with this domain, and here's my password. And it said, yeah, sure, we're good to go on that. And what it didn't tell me is if anyone's an admin, they can pull that information straight out of there. So what we can do with this is, once again, we're going to take that user, and here, we'll actually do this. I know that the credential is in my database, so we can actually look up credentials by a specific name. So that happens to be credential ID 3. So CME SMB on all of our live hosts with an ID of 3. And if you look, this person is an admin everywhere. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a DC sync. So this is the 10.10.10.10 is the domain controller. So CME SMB 10.10.10.10 with, and we'll type out everything just for fun. Username of Brink, password is Duncan MA Pog, and that authenticates. So CME is really nice. CME is pretty much a wrapper for a lot of the Packet network tools. And you type out NTDS or TAC NTDS, and that will run the same dumping method as secretsdump.py. And we do that. And then we get a bunch of hashes. So it will give us the hash of, we will get the Ntlm hash of every user in the domain, including the Caribou TGT hash, which we're not going to talk about today, but that can be used for a golden ticket. We get the machine account for every single user, and then a bunch of Kerberos stuff as well. And with that, that's pretty much it. I'm going to go back to the slides quickly, just for a couple things. if I can remember how to use a computer. There we go. And yeah, so here's a bunch of tools. CrackMap exec is up there. LSASSy's up there. The Impacket toolkit's there. Bloodhound, Ntlm to Silver Ticket. We'll talk more about that printer attack. And then tons of write-ups and blogs related to Active Directory. And naturally, my shameless self-plug at the end, _sandwich. Follow me on Twitter there. And I pretty much only retweet NetPen stuff. So if you're interested in this, my Twitter actually at this point is a good resource because I've been retweeting other really good resources for about a year and a half. Another really good place to go is the Bloodhound Slack. If you go to the link here, you'll get into a group of a lot of people who do this for their full-time job. So everyone is very friendly and welcoming to answering questions about pretty much anything you have. Bunch of thanks to like my employer, Bloodhound Slack specifically. I probably ask a question in there once or twice a week, if not more. A couple of specific people, Pixis, Ropnup, Dirk Jan, and Sean Metcalf. They all have amazing blogs and amazing tools. SpectreOps and Black Hills InfoSec, they also make a bunch of really good blogs and a bunch of really good tools, specifically calling out ByteBleeder and MPGN because they are fantastic on CrackMap exec. And there's tons of other people I could call out, but this is just a quick list of them. And with that, are there any questions? And I'm watching the chat if anyone has questions. Cool. If anyone has any more questions, oh wait. Okay, there is a question. You mentioned setting up a lab to learn. How do you do that? I'll head back to that page and talk a little bit more in depth. And yeah, exactly. No one can spend the kind of money to get a full 100 like host lab. You don't need to do that. I mean, this entire demo that I just showed you, which demonstrated, I think 4 or 5 different like attacks, that has 2 Windows 10 VMs and a Windows Server 2016. You can get Windows evaluation licenses, which last for somewhere from 30 to 90 days. Yeah, and a lot of colleges, it looks like you guys might actually have free licenses for UCF as well. There's also, if you have, like Detection Lab is a really good one to spin up. That's just Vagrant. Vagrant is pretty much a wrapper for VirtualBox's API. And that spins up a whole Active Directory environment and puts logging in place. So the attacks you can see you can really see what's going on. Detection Labs will only need a box with like 16 gigs of RAM. So most laptops at this point can deal with that. Capital Corp pen test is another thing that needs a little bit more. Bad Blood will give you tons of objects into your AD environment. It will, so when you use Bloodhound, it won't just say, hey, here are my 2 or 3 Windows servers. It'll show, hey, here are my thousands of objects I have here, even if they aren't actually like really there. Hopefully that answered your question. I have a thread somewhere about it on Twitter. If you send me a message on Twitter, I can send you that. I just need to go find it. For the Ipv6 DNS issue, there are a couple ways you can push out GPO to just actually turn off all of Ipv6. If you don't need it, I would recommend that. If you do need it, you can do some monitoring for rogue Ipv6 servers. For example, I want to say it's called DHCP Shield or something like that. But if you look up DHCP snooping, but for Ipv6, It's either like DHCP, guard, or shield, or something like that. So just having detections for rogue IPv6 servers would be another way if you can't just fully disable IPv6. Any other questions?
Thank you everyone for attending. Scott, thank you again for taking the time. I think that's all the announcements for today. So if you saw some of the stuff there, wasn't sure all those hashes stuff, all that cracking as well. As a reminder, we do have that workshop tomorrow at noon. So we'll go over cracking passwords and hopefully have a lot more information about those specifically if you want to follow up with that. So if we'll see you on Saturday at noon if you're attending the workshop. If not, then we'll come back next Friday, same time. So with that out of the way, thank you everyone. We'll see you next time.